The gentle patter of rain against the hospital windows couldn't mask the sound of whimpers coming from behind the dumpster. I was just finishing my late-night volunteer shift at the University Medical Center when I heard it. A sound that would change my life forever. Most pre-med students stuck to daytime volunteering, but I preferred the quiet of the night shift. It gave me time to think, to process the weight of my studies, and sometimes just to breathe. That rainy Thursday night felt different though. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe just luck, but something made me pause as I walked toward my car. The whimpers grew fainter as I approached the dumpster, careful not to make sudden movements. What I found there broke my heart. A young husky mix, soaked to the bone, with a makeshift bandage wrapped messily around her front leg. Her blue eyes, though clouded with pain, met mine with an intensity that spoke of both fear and desperate hope. "Hey there, sweet girl," I whispered, crouching down slowly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog's tail gave the faintest wag, but she pressed herself further against the wall, clearly terrified. Who could have left her here, injured and alone? The thought made my blood boil. I had always been taught that actions speak louder than words, so I sat down right there on the wet pavement, ignoring the rain soaking through my scrubs. Time seemed to stand still as I waited, occasionally speaking in soft tones, letting her know she wasn't alone anymore. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, she inched forward, her nose twitching as she caught my scent. The moment she finally let me touch her head was like magic. Despite her fear and pain, she leaned into my hand, and I felt the tremors running through her body. The bandage on her leg was filthy, and I could see signs of infection setting in around the edges. My medical training, though meant for humans, told me this wasn't good. Getting her to trust me enough to be carried was another challenge entirely. Thank goodness for the leftover turkey sandwich in my backpack. A midnight snack that became a peace offering. As she carefully ate from my hand, I got my first real look at her injuries. Beyond the obvious leg wound, she was malnourished, and her beautiful coat was matted with mud, and who knows what else. I couldn't just leave her there, but I also knew the local animal hospital was closed until morning. My tiny studio apartment wasn't exactly set up for a dog, especially an injured one, but something about those eyes made the decision for me. She was coming home with me, at least for the night. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning of our story. I had no idea how this wounded, abandoned dog would not only heal physically, but would help heal parts of myself I didn't even know were broken. As I carefully lifted her into my car, wrapping her in my spare jacket, I couldn't have predicted how she would change the way I thought about medicine, about healing, and about what it truly means to save a life. But that night, as the rain continued to fall and I drove home with my unexpected passenger, all I knew was that I had to help her. What I didn't realize was that dark night outside the hospital was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about compassion, recovery, and the incredible bonds that can form between species when we choose to open our hearts to those in need. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of our journey together. The drive home that night was surreal. Every few minutes, I'd glance in my rearview mirror, half expecting to find my backseat empty, as if she'd been a figment of my imagination. But there she was, curled up on my jacket, those piercing blue eyes watching my every move with a mixture of wariness and exhaustion. My apartment building's no pets policy suddenly felt like the least of my worries. Getting her up 3 flights of stairs without being seen was going to be interesting, but late-night studying had taught me when the hallways were usually empty. As I parked, she lifted her head slightly, and I could swear I saw a question in those eyes. Was this another place she'd be abandoned? "We're home, girl," I whispered, hoping my voice would offer some comfort. "Let's get you cleaned up." The walk up the stairs was nerve-wracking. Every creak of the old wooden steps made me freeze, but somehow we made it without encountering any neighbors. Thank goodness for small miracles. My studio apartment wasn't much, just a bed, a desk cluttered with medical textbooks, and a tiny kitchenette. But as I gently stepped her down on my bathroom floor, it felt like the most important space in the world. The first aid kit I kept for my clinical practice training was about to get an unexpected use. Under the harsh bathroom light, Her condition looked even worse. The matted fur around her leg wound was tinged with yellow, definitely infected. My hands shook slightly as I carefully cut away the dirty bandage. What I found underneath made my stomach turn. The gash was deep, and though someone had clearly tried to wrap it, they'd done more harm than good. As I cleaned the wound, my mind wandered to my childhood, to the summer I spent shadowing our local vet. Dr. Sarah had always said that animals were some of the best teachers of medicine. They couldn't tell you what was wrong, so you had to become an expert at observation. Those lessons were coming in handy now. The husky mix, I'd started mentally calling her Luna because of her silvery coat, stayed remarkably still during the whole process. Only the occasional whimper betrayed her pain. It was as if she understood I was trying to help, even as I had to cause her some discomfort to clean the wound properly. Around 3 a.m., with the wound cleaned and properly dressed, I finally sat back against my bathtub, exhausted. Luna had accepted some water and a few pieces of plain chicken I'd found in my fridge, but she still wouldn't let me get too close unless I was treating her injury. Fair enough. Trust takes time. Sleep wasn't going to come easy that night. Questions kept spinning through my head. Who had hurt her? Why leave her behind the hospital? The bandage suggested someone had tried to help at some point, but what had gone wrong? And most pressingly, what was I going to do next? My phone's screen glowed in the darkness as I researched local veterinary clinics. My student budget was tight, but there had to be options. As I scrolled, Luna's head gradually came to rest against my leg, the first voluntary contact she'd initiated. Something in my chest tightened at that simple gesture of trust. A text from my study group lit up my phone. Still on for anatomy review tomorrow morning? Tomorrow. Right. Real life was still happening, with all its responsibilities and obligations. But as I looked down at the sleeping dog beside me, I knew something fundamental had shifted in my world. My carefully planned path toward medical school suddenly felt less rigid, less certain. The sun was starting to peek through my window, and with it came the realization that this was just the first of many challenges ahead. But sometimes the most important decisions in life don't feel like decisions at all. They feel like destiny calling. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights, hidden dog food deliveries, and constant worry. Luna's wound was slowly improving with proper care, but I knew she needed professional help. My savings were modest, barely enough for one semester's textbooks, but I couldn't ignore the growing infection despite my best efforts. It was during one of my late-night study sessions, with Luna curled up near my feet, that a sudden knock at my door made both of us freeze. My heart pounded as Mrs. Chen's voice carried through the thin wood. "Wren inspection tomorrow morning." Luna's eyes met mine, and I saw my own panic reflected there. I spent that night transforming my apartment, hiding every trace of my four-legged roommate. The food bowl went into my backpack, the new blanket into the laundry, and the medications behind my anatomy textbooks. But how was I going to hide Luna herself? The fire escape seemed like the only option, though the thought of leaving her out there made me sick to my stomach. That's when my phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. A local news alert, investigation ongoing. Underground dog fighting ring discovered near University District. The photos in the article made my blood run cold. The injuries shown looked eerily similar to Luna's wound. Suddenly, the mysterious bandage, the hospital dumpster, everything started making horrible sense. Luna must have escaped or been abandoned by someone involved. But if that was true, she wasn't just a wounded stray. She was evidence. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The next morning, during the inspection, I could barely focus on Mrs. Chen's questions about water damage and window seals. Luna was safely hidden at my classmate's apartment down the street, but my mind was racing. If I reported what I knew, would Luna be taken away? Would she be put down if no one claimed her? And more terrifyingly, were the people who had hurt her still looking for her? Later that day, as I rushed between classes, I noticed a beat-up van circling the university parking lot. The same van I'd seen 3 times that week. Coincidence? My hands shook as I called the police tip line, hanging up twice before finally letting it ring. Each passing moment felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. knowing the jump was necessary but terrified of the fall. That evening, while checking Luna's bandages, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. They stopped right at my door. Luna's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in her chest, the first sound I'd heard her make besides whimpers. The doorknob slowly began to turn. My heart thundered in my chest as I reached for my phone. The police detective I'd spoken to earlier had said to call immediately if anything seemed suspicious. But would they arrive in time? Luna pressed against my legs, no longer the frightened dog from the dumpster, but a protector, her blue eyes fixed on the door with fierce determination. The doorknob kept turning, and in that moment, I realized we were no longer just a student and a wounded dog. We were witnesses, potential targets, and maybe the key to bringing down something much darker than I'd imagined when I first heard those whimpers in the rain. Time seemed to slow as I heard a key slide into the lock, a key that shouldn't exist. Luna's growl deepened, and I grabbed her collar, both of us backing toward the bathroom. My phone was in my hand, but who should I call first? The police? Animal control? The detective? Each second felt like an eternity as the lock slowly clicked. The door swung open, revealing not the thugs I'd feared, but my anatomy professor, Dr. Rivera. For a split second, relief flooded through me, until I saw the grim expression on her face and the way her eyes immediately locked onto Luna. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't a coincidence. "We need to talk," she said quietly, stepping inside and closing the door, "and we don't have much time." Luna's growl had subsided, but she remained alert, watching Dr. Rivera's every move. The professor reached into her coat and pulled out something that made my breath catch, a photo of Luna, clearly taken before her injury, wearing a collar I'd never seen. She was part of a research study, Dr. Rivera explained, her voice heavy with emotion. A legitimate one, studying canine cognitive development. Until someone falsified the data and started selling dogs on the side. I've been trying to track them down for months. The pieces started falling into place. The hospital location, the amateur medical care, the mysterious van. Before I could process this revelation, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know where she is. Last chance." Attached was a photo of me walking Luna late last night, taken from somewhere nearby. Dr. Rivera's face paled when I showed her the message. "They must have followed me here," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was careful." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the stairwell, multiple sets this time. Luna's ears perked up, and she moved between us and the door, her protective instinct stronger than her fear. Dr. Rivera moved quickly to my window, peering out at the fire escape. "There's a safe house," she said urgently, "for whistleblowers and rescued animals. But we have to move now." The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by voices, angry ones. I had seconds to decide. Could I trust Dr. Rivera? The look in her eyes seemed genuine, but after everything that had happened, how could I be sure? Luna made the decision for me, pressing against Dr. Rivera's leg in a gesture of recognition I'd only seen her do with me. As we hurried to gather Luna's medications, a sharp knock rattled my door. Campus security. "Open up." But something about the voice felt wrong. Too aggressive, too urgent. Dr. Rivera shook her head, warning me to stay quiet. She pulled out her phone, showing me a text thread with local police. They were on their way, but we had maybe 5 minutes. The knocking turned to pounding, and I heard the distinct sound of someone tampering with the lock again. Luna's hackles raised, but she remained eerily silent, as if understanding the gravity of our situation. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The window to my fire escape wouldn't budge, jammed shut from years of disuse. The door frame started to splinter under the assault, and then, from somewhere in the building, a fire alarm began to blare. Dr. Rivera's phone lit up with another message that made her face turn ashen. "Change of plans," she said, her voice barely audible over the alarm and pounding. "They're not just here for Luna anymore. What she witnessed, what she could reveal." She pulled something else from her coat, a small notebook filled with dates, names, and locations. "This goes so much deeper than a few stolen dogs." The door gave an ominous crack. We were out of time, out of options, and now, apparently, caught in something far more dangerous than I'd imagined when I found a wounded dog behind a dumpster. As the fire alarm continued to scream, I realized we weren't just fighting to save Luna anymore. We were fighting to expose a truth that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The fire alarm's shriek masked the final crack of my apartment door giving way. In that chaos, three things happened simultaneously. Luna lunged forward with a protective bark. Dr. Rivera yanked me toward the bathroom, and through the splintering door came not the thugs we expected, but a SWAT team in full gear. "Get down!" The command cut through the chaos as officers flooded my tiny apartment. Through the confusion, I caught glimpses of more law enforcement in the hallway and heard the distinct sound of helicopters overhead. Luna, surprisingly, stayed close to me, her previous fear transformed into unwavering vigilance. It turned out Dr. Rivera's text thread wasn't just with local police. It was part of a coordinated sting operation months in the making. The research study scandal had led investigators to uncover something far more sinister: a network of corruption involving illegal medical testing, money laundering, and several high-ranking university officials. As we were escorted to safety, I watched from a police vehicle as familiar faces were led out of my building in handcuffs: the dean of the medical school, the head of campus security, even Mrs. Chen, my building manager, who'd been using her master keys to help the criminals access apartments across the city. But the biggest shock came when they brought out the last perpetrator, the young volunteer coordinator from the hospital, the one who'd always given me the night shifts I'd requested. She'd been using her position to coordinate drop-offs behind the hospital, using the dumpster area as a blind spot in the security cameras. Luna's escape hadn't been luck. She'd been helped by another student volunteer who discovered the truth but disappeared before they could report it. The makeshift bandage, I learned, had been their rushed attempt to help her before they vanished. Their final act had been leaving Luna where they knew other volunteers would find her. In the following days, as I gave statements and helped document Luna's injuries for evidence, the full scope of what we'd uncovered began to emerge. The research study had been a front for unauthorized medical trials, with the dog-fighting ring serving as a convenient cover for unexplained injuries. Luna's DNA carried markers that proved she'd been subjected to experimental treatments that were never meant to be discovered. Dr. Rivera, it turned out, had been working with federal investigators for months, carefully gathering evidence while appearing to be just another professor. The notebook she carried contained encoded data that would help prosecute not just the local operation, but similar rings across the country. A week later, as I sat in my new apartment, a safe house provided by the prosecutor's office, Luna rested her head on my lap, her wounds finally healing properly. Her testimony, in the form of DNA evidence and documented injuries, would help put away dozens of criminals. But more importantly, she'd found her forever home with the person she'd chosen to trust that rainy night. The door buzzed, and Dr. Rivera entered with a stack of papers. "They're offering you a full scholarship," she said, smiling. "The university's new board wants to make things right." She paused, then added, "They're also wondering if you'd consider running their new animal welfare program alongside your medical studies." I looked down at Luna, remembering that first moment behind the dumpster. Her blue eyes met mine with the same intensity, but now there was something else there, not just trust, but partnership. We'd saved each other in ways neither of us could have imagined. As I reached for the papers, my phone lit up with a message that made me freeze. It was from an unknown number, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a single line. "Thank you for finishing what I started. The Night Volunteer." Attached was a photo of a familiar face, the missing student, safe and ready to come forward with even more evidence. Luna's tail thumped against the floor, and I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best medicine isn't found in textbooks or laboratories, but in the simple act of choosing to help when others look away. As for that mysterious night volunteer, well, that's another story altogether. 6 months later, Luna and I walked across the university campus, her limp now barely noticeable. Students smiled and waved as we passed. She'd become something of a celebrity after the story broke. The new university administration had not only welcomed her as the unofficial mascot of the veterinary program, but had also established the Luna Foundation, dedicated to combining medical research with animal welfare. The missing student, now revealed as Sarah Chen, no relation to my former building manager, had become a close friend. Her decision to hide Luna behind the hospital that night, knowing my reputation for working late shifts, had been a calculated risk that paid off more than anyone could have imagined. She now headed the university's new Ethical Research Oversight Committee, ensuring that no animals would ever again be subjected to unauthorized testing. Dr. Rivera's notebook had led to investigations at 12 other universities across the country. The evidence we'd uncovered had exposed a network of corruption that had operated unchecked for years, but more importantly, it had sparked a nationwide conversation about ethical research practices in animal welfare and medical studies. My tiny apartment had been replaced by a cozy house with a yard, a gift from an anonymous donor who'd read about our story. Luna had her own garden now, where she loved to lay in the sun and watch butterflies. The scars on her leg had faded, but they served as a reminder of the journey that had brought us here. The night volunteer program at the hospital had been completely restructured, with new security measures and oversight protocols. But they kept one tradition. Every new volunteer was required to hear Luna's story, a reminder that sometimes the most important medical discoveries come from following your heart rather than your textbooks. As for my medical studies, they'd taken an unexpected turn. I discovered a passion for veterinary medicine alongside human care, leading me to pursue a unique dual program the university had created. Luna accompanied me to every class, her presence a living testament to the connection between human and animal healing. The prosecution of the corrupt officials had concluded last week, with satisfying justice served to all involved. Mrs. Chen and her accomplices would spend years behind bars, and the former dean had turned state's evidence, helping to uncover similar operations across the country. But the most meaningful victory came in the form of letters, hundreds of them, from people who'd been inspired to adopt rescued animals or report suspected abuse after hearing our story. Each one reminded me that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. Today, as Luna and I sat beneath our favorite oak tree on campus, a young student approached us carrying a familiar-looking notebook. "Is it true?" she asked, eyes bright with curiosity. "Did it all really start with a whimper behind a dumpster?" Luna's tail wagged as I smiled, remembering that rainy night that felt like a lifetime ago. "Sometimes," I replied, watching Luna gently accept pets from the student. "The most important moments in our lives don't announce themselves with fanfare. They whisper to us in the dark, asking if we're brave enough to listen." The student nodded, clutching her notebook a little tighter. "I want to make a difference too," she said softly. Luna stretched out beside her, offering silent encouragement, as she always did to those who needed it most. As the autumn leaves danced around us, I realized that our story hadn't really ended. It had just changed shape. Every day, Luna and I continued to learn from each other, to heal together, and to remind others that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in a prescription or a procedure, but in the simple decision to stop, listen, and care. After all, in a world that can sometimes feel overwhelmingly dark, it only takes one person, or one dog, to light the way forward. And for Luna and me, that light grows stronger every day.